A troubling day of classes at North High in Minneapolis, a day when many thought about a fellow student's death.
WCCO Television presents Don Shelby, Pat Miles, and Bud Crayley. This is the 5 p.m. report.
Good afternoon, everyone. North High School students and faculty today began trying to get over the beating death of a student.
It's not every day that high school students have to cope with the beating death of a classmate inside the school hallways. So it's understandable that hundreds of North High students met with counselors today. Pedro Ramos died last night due to injuries from a fight, and his classmates mourned.
It's unreal. No one can believe it, and I still think that no one can believe it. I mean, we cry, but actually we don't. Our mind or our body just doesn't accept it yet.
I mean, I hope that, all the negative things and all the crying and the sorrow soon ends, but I want people to get a positive perspective in their head.
During counseling sessions, students talked about establishing fundraisers and a college scholarship fund in Ramos's name. Several counselors and psychologists were called in to talk with the students. 17-year-old Pedro Ramos was beaten up by 3 visiting teenagers last Thursday when he tried to break up a fight.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled today that high school publications, like a newspaper, can be censored. The justices ruled 5-4 that students do not enjoy the same freedom of speech rights at school as they do outside school. Now, the case involves students at a St. Louis high school who sued the school for removing several articles from their newspaper, one of them dealing with teen pregnancy. This afternoon, we wanted to sample some opinions on the decision, and to do that, we take you to Edina High School, where the school's newspaper editor and the principal are standing by live. Andy Harrod and Principal Robert Lynch, we thank you for joining us this afternoon. I wonder if we could just quickly at the top get your reaction to the decision today.
My reaction was rather negative. I just heard about it at the end of school today, and I did not like it. I feel that a school newspaper, like any other newspaper, should not be censored. It should have its First Amendment rights, and those rights should be respected. The school board or the administration should not have the right to step in and say, we do not like this particular article, we think it's too controversial or whatever, and just zap it out.
Has that ever happened, Mr. Lynch?
I don't believe it's happened at Edina High School because of the fact that the students learn in their class to assume responsibility for journalism, and they make the decisions in cooperation with the moderator, so we have not had a problem in this regard.
I wonder if I could get your opinion, too, because I thought it was interesting when reading the decision that Justice White wrote in his opinion that it was a supervised learning experience for journalism students and therefore could be censored by the school principal. My reaction to that was, boy, let's hope we have a good principal at the school when they decide to make the decision to pull articles. Any comments on that, and how do you feel, and isn't that a big responsibility?
Primarily what I believe is we delegate that responsibility as principals to the moderator. We trust the teacher who works with the students, or else the teacher shouldn't be in that role. In that role, we presume he or she will make the decision, and that's why we ask people to serve in that capacity.
Do you foresee, Andy, any problems in the future at Edina High School and with your own job as editor on the paper there?
No, I don't. Myself and my fellow co-editor Jeff Bland, we have always had a very congenial attitude with the administration, both with Mr. Lynch, who just took over this year, and with Mr. Sabalka, who retired last year. I believe when I was interviewing Mr. Sabalka for a story last year, he told me that in his 14 years with the Edina schools, he had never stepped in and taken out a story before publication. So we've really had no experience with any form of censorship of all, and we are very fortunate in that respect.
You are, and we thank you both for being with us this afternoon. Sorry we're out of time so quickly, but we appreciate your opinions, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Job retraining is on the way for some 700 former Amhoist workers who lost their jobs when the company moved to North Carolina. St. Paul Mayor George Latimer and Congressman Bruce Vinto announced today the development of a $2.8 million job creation and training program. Much of that money comes from a grant that was originally awarded to Amhoist, but revoked when the company misused the cash to relocate. Billy Glaze, the suspect in the Minneapolis serial killings, is expected to be returned to Minneapolis next week. Today, he was indicted in federal court in Minneapolis for Social Security fraud. Prosecutors expect to bring Glaze here to face the charge. Glaze currently serving time in a Dallas jail for rape. Billy Glaze became a suspect in the murders of 3 American Indian women last spring. Minneapolis police say they will continue their investigation of Billy Glaze, and they hope to indict him eventually on murder charges as well. President Reagan met Japan's new prime minister for the first time today. Prime Minister Noboru Takeshita is expected to lift barriers that have kept American agricultural products and construction companies out of Japanese markets. President Reagan made it to the summit meeting despite having been up half the night with stomach problems. He told reporters this morning that he felt pretty good.
The president of Taiwan is dead. The 77-year-old died of a heart attack this morning. He was the son and successor of Chiang Kai-shek, who led the nationalists to Taiwan after the Communist Revolution in China. 10 years ago today, Minnesota joined the world in saying goodbye to the happy warrior, Hubert Humphrey. The former vice president and senator, mayor of Minneapolis, died at his Waverly Lakeside home with friends and relatives at his side. Humphrey died of cancer at the age of 66. The day is etched in the memory of many people. It was a cold day. The wind chill was 20 degrees below zero.
And among the members of the world press who gathered at the Humphrey home that night was our own Al Austin. And Al joins us now with some recollections on this 10-year anniversary day of the passing of the happy warrior.
It was mid-afternoon that we got word that Mr. Humphrey was at the point of death. We raced to Waverly, and I was doing editorials at the time, and so I was counting on working indoors. I had a jacket, no cap, no gloves, old loafers with holes in them, and it was the coldest I've ever been. For 10 hours we stood on the road outside his house, waiting for word, not getting much of anything in the way of information. As you know, when you go to do a live report, you not only have to suffer the cold, but you have to be able to talk. After so many hours, I was really frozen solid, my mind and my voice. I can't really remember if I did a report.
Do you remember feeling, Al, at the time, though, that, boy, I'm part of history in the making here, and that
Oh,
this
yes.
is something
There was no question of that, especially as more and more cars arrived at the house, all the networks and the Time and Newsweek reporters, and there was no doubt about that.
One of the things that I was just reading about this, and of course all of the newspapers are doing stories retrospective, but one of the things they mentioned was that there were so many people who stood out in the cold the day of his funeral to see him pass by, his body pass by.
And sometimes we may wonder if Minnesotans have an overblown impression of his importance and the affection in which he was held. But I went to Washington, where his body first lay in state. And I can tell you that he was a man of the nation, because there were huge lines of people waiting outside the Capitol to file past his casket in Washington. And I remember there being lots of kids. Everyone seemed to have a kid along, a child, as though giving them a chance to be able to say 50 years later that, yeah, I said goodbye to the happy warrior.
All right. Thank you very much, Al, for your remembrances on this.
10 years have gone by pretty quickly, haven't they?
Too quickly.
Yeah. Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Al. Next today, the football team that makes Minnesota proud has traveled to the South.